Ladies and gentlemen, coming soon, a podcast you've all been waiting for. The Movie Podcast to end all movie podcasts. A podcast that discusses and critiques the best of the best and the worst of the worst movies playing at a theater near you. With a host whose opinions have been deemed as fact by your favorite fact checkers. And that's a fact. Without further ado, let me introduce you to the movie maestro, the tyrant of theater, the gumshoe of review, the man that makes theater employees and Hollywood execs shiver by his mere presence. Ladies and gentlemen, the judge, the jury, the sultan of cinema, Justin Henson. Welcome to the Movie Wire.
And welcome to this week's edition of The Movie Wire. I'm your host, Justin Henson, and welcome to the show. We've got a big week this week with 3 brand new reviews, with all playing in theaters right now. This week on the show, don't underestimate this little old lady because revenge will never be sweeter in the comedy Thelma. Kevin Costner takes on the story of a nation unsettled in Horizon, an American Saga, Chapter 1. Then finally, hear how it all began.
Shh, be quiet.
Stay quiet, stay alive. In a Quiet Place, Day 1. We got a lot to cover this week, so let's jump right in. Ready for my verdict? Let's get into it.
Out of the windows, what? A roar and a burst of flame.
The Movie Wire podcast.
You need people like me.
Podcast for hot and trending movies.
The Wire.
And here we go.
A woman named Sam finds herself trapped in New York City during the early stages of an invasion by alien creatures with ultra-sensitive hearing in this prequel to A Quiet Place in A Quiet Place Day 1.
I'm Michael Sarnowski. I'm the writer-director of Quiet Place Day 1. John Krasinski came to me and he had seen a film I did called Pig, and he said, what would it look like if you brought some of that pig touch to the Quiet Place universe? And he gave me a lot of space and time to figure out what my into that story would be. And I really came to this character of Sam that I became very interested in and excited about. And I pitched it to him, half expecting him to say, well, that's not really the direction we want to go. It's a little odd. But he was so supportive and said, heck yeah, let's do it. And he gave me a lot of freedom to really explore this story and explore this narrative and really make it my own, which was very generous of him. And yeah, I think we've made a movie that feels very much its own and will be exciting and moving. I had seen both of the Quiet Place films in theaters when they came out, and they are a really special movie-going experience to watch with an audience. So I had a wonderful experience with both of those, and I just loved how fundamental and essential those stories were where you got to follow intimate character dramas while also faced with this very primal and visceral challenge of these creatures that hunt by sound, and if you make a sound you die. And I liked sort of the simplicity of that allowed you to explore really nuanced characters. So I was very excited to in that unit. John and Paramount were extremely gracious in giving me the space that I needed to make this movie. John really said, hey, make this movie your own, and gave me a lot of support and advice on how to kind of take the reins on this and explore his universe in a way that felt all my own. And I don't think I could have done it without that freedom and without finding something that I really cared about in these characters and then had the opportunity to explore. I think there's a lot of pressure and ideas of what we could see in a prequel and how much you could expand this universe, because there's so many ways you could go with A Quiet Place. And for me, I just really had to focus on characters and finding a story that I was excited about and that I cared about, because you have to live with these characters for years and see a whole movie through their eyes, and I think finding the opportunity to really tell a unique story within this amazing universe was the thing that most excited me. Going from the original 2 Quiet Place movies to Day 1 is going to feel like a big jump in scale. You're going from a rural environment to one of the loudest cities in the world, and there's multiple creatures, so many people that are dealing with this situation, and I think it's going to feel like the next sort of level of how people are having to deal with these creatures and seeing how they initially had to learn about this. Yet at the same time, I think it really honors the roots of the franchise in being character-driven dramas that are about unique people going through this situation and how they're dealing with it. And I think in Sam and Eric, we've really found a story that feels all its own. I think with Quiet Place Day 1, audiences can expect something that's exciting, that's tense, but also something that's moving and surprisingly emotional, filled with incredible performances and incredible set pieces that feel visceral and engrossing. And they'll get to watch some characters that hopefully they'll really fall in love with, learn about each other, and discover this world together.
Now, when John Krasinski introduced us to hyper-hearing monsters in 2018, he brought something unique to the big screen. But not only that, but made a unique theater experience that just didn't add a scary threat on screen, but made moviegoers terrified to open up their bags of candy and terrified how loud they chewed their popcorn, to the point they just left the popcorn simmer in their mouth and let the saliva soften the crunchy treat to the point of soggy corn just sliding down their gullet. Now, A Quiet Place Part 2 continued the story of our Abbott family with a newborn baby that we saw in the climax at the end of the first movie that added some intrigue of how to live in this world with bringing up a baby, that had a different level of tension that really did add some intensity that made the stakes just as exciting as the first movie. Both the first and the second movies make situations tense and scary and doesn't really rely on the monsters to build the scares. The monsters are treated as just mainly the cherry on top to really add to the already tense moments. Here in the third installment, in Day 1, we don't get a family that has to face challenges with a hearing impaired daughter and also has to prepare for the birth of a child or raising a baby in the new world. And in Part 3, we get a cat. That at times I wondered, why didn't they just give us a point of view of the damn cat? The cat shares a decent amount of screen time of just a cat roaming around this world. We get so many shots of this damn cat just walking the streets with no real rhyme or reason to these shots. Director Michael Sarnowski takes a director's seat in replacement of John Krasinski. Sarnowski's biggest screen credit is 2021's Pig, which was a fantastic movie. But we do see some of Sarnowski's traits translate over here, which at times does not work. For example, we take our feline character, who we have random shots of just a cat interacting with the environment that has really no sense of danger, with the exception of a shot at low angle of the cat drinking some water. Sarnowski would have been better off utilizing this cat to give us a bigger symbolic picture of this small animal in this new world of destruction. Have this cat placed in areas of destruction and zoom out on the camera. Make these shots relevant. Don't just add a cat to fill screen time. I get the intent of utilizing a cat, but I think it's overused in this movie with nowhere to go. Michael Sarnowski did pen this screenplay with a story helped by John Krasinski, but we can tell this screenplay wasn't written by Krasinski because Sarnowski banks on jump scares to make this movie frightening, not our characters' situations that builds to a frightening environment. Day 1 does something different than the previous two films, which is take this concept and turn it into just another generic monster movie, with monsters that jump out of corners of the screen with the volume turned all the way up to make the viewer jump. I can see the attempt by Sarnowski to at least add in a character to help make some, I don't want to consider it a stake, but rather a motivation. It takes our main character Sam, played by Lupita Nyong'o, who gives a good performance here. There's nothing wrong with the performance that she delivers, especially during the climax, but the character is written with a lack of vision. Sarnowski gives her some traits and conflict where she is dying from cancer and has one last mission before she goes to close a chapter on her life. There is a lot to this character, and Sarnowski really doesn't have the Krasinski touch to utilize this character in the current setting. To add that human element, to add that natural state. In the first two movies, we get the Krasinski touch of the human element, of understanding of the human trait. Here we don't get that, even when it comes to the settings. Even more so, when it comes to the settings, Krasinski took advantage of the settings in the first two films. When it comes to the settings here, Sarnowski doesn't take advantage of this brilliant setting. In Day 1, in a big city, where when we take a lot of alien invasion movies, it always ends up in a city. And we usually get blockbuster special effects and all that. We don't get the blockbuster special effects here. We don't get really much of anything. He just merely places characters in places that would be intended on suspenseful, but really doesn't show us the magnitude of what is actually transpiring on Day 1. As a matter of fact, we gain no new knowledge on what transpired. There's no real new information given. When you title a movie Day 1 based on 3 movies, I would expect something different rather than just dumbed down characters and dumbed down stakes that go from environment to environment and run from creature to creature in each new environment. We have this big city where the aliens land. We see this initial invasion, but then we skip over any potential interesting plot points, such as where did they come from? How did we discover that they could only hear? How did did the world respond? The movie created more questions than answers. Now, the first Quiet Place offered an edge of wonder and mystery by giving us little information on these aliens. The second gave us more dealing in daily life. And with a movie entitled Day One, was a great opportunity to widen the curiosity and even tension as the world discover what's going on. There is a scene that teases at something greater if there was just a little bit more thought put in, where we have civilians en masse walk down the street in the city in complete silence. The scene felt like he could have done a lot more with this idea. We saw a family in seclusion deal with it, but how would we deal with it in the big city? This is something that really isn't explored, but rather just teased. But what our director does is keep it at bare minimum. Do we get panned out shots of a city destroyed? Yes. Do we get lots of random places on fire and smoke? Yes. Do we get demolished buildings? Yes. But how did they get destroyed? Just like the cat, Michael Cernowski proves he likes to show the outcome with wide panned out shots of destruction and up close shots of reactions from the characters and a cat. But he asks the audience to piece it together for themselves, banking on the previous two movies to drive the imagination from the audience. I could feel the intent for Cernowski thinking that Karansky did most of the groundwork, just thinking, hey, you know what? I don't need to show anything different because I had these creatures chase noises for the 100-minute runtime. And what this does is create more questions than answers. And in the previous films, there was no need to have these questions answered because Karansky set the tone of expectation. We have a scene that's reminiscent from the waterfall scene that we had from the first movie, where we have our main character Sam hide out underneath a water fountain that's drowning out all the noise. This is where my mind went starting for the first time. My mind went wild with questions because there was no expectation set by Cernowski, except in the title. This is Day One. When we had this water fountain, I thought to myself, how did they discover this would drown out the noise? Or how are creatures distinguish what's a consistent sound? Why wasn't the water fountain destroyed when they first arrived, like everything else? Since it generated noise. Because of the first movie's waterfall, I thought to myself, is it the water that the creatures know is a consistent sound? How does it know it's a consistent sound? What determines that? If the sound of water is the case, why did anybody build a strategy around water? Open up fire hydrants. Hell, I don't know. I guess I would be the only survivor by covering the outside of my house with 1,000 fucking sprinklers. About the halfway mark, what I found more entertaining is asking a lot of my own questions to myself and building strategies of what I would do. Like a scene where we have Sam in bed. I thought to myself, what happens if she snores? How many people died from merely just snoring or talking in their sleep? There are a lot of questions of this concept that could have been inserted to build an understanding, to build some more depth, to build some more substance, and to actually set the groundwork as a prequel to see what our Abbott family will understand going into the original movie in 2018. A prequel should set the groundwork for the future movies. This does not. It does nothing of the sort. It treats itself as an individual movie that really doesn't get me to want to rewatch the other two movies because there's nothing to add. This is treated as just another creature feature with a repetitive formula that has nothing to the franchise. As a prequel, I would have expected something of uniqueness, questions answered, and the groundwork for even maybe some rewatch value to go back and visit the other films. But we don't. Are there entertaining elements? Sure. It has its moments. Did I jump at times? Sure. Cheap jump scares, but yes, I did jump. Does it stand out among the standards of intensity or stakes of the first two films? No! Which leads us to a disappointing prequel that doesn't deliver. What I'm sure many are hoping from a title with Day One inserted into it is what happens on Day One. The same shit we saw from the days after. But it does throw out a shining star of the movie, Lupita Nyong'o, with a great performance, but adds nothing to support her other than a good idea of her journey. But the journey between the beginning and the end is a bumpy one filled with just running from monsters, which if you go in with that expectation, you'll enjoy yourself. It's an entertaining film for the most part. There are enough elements to keep your eyes glued to the screen, but a lot of these are in hopes of seeing something different. Where we do see something different, and we do kind of see an attempt, is that showing our character Sam's journey to go to a decision of deciding her own fate. In a way, it's a beautiful insertion into this movie and has a closure that, if we look deep and take the monsters out of it, can resonate with all of us on the topic of death. I can cherry pick this movie on the good and bad elements, but here's what the movie is. It is an entertaining ride for the most part, but if you take the other two movies out of it, It's an okay creature feature, but all in all, if Michael Sarnowski wanted to do something really bold and give audiences something unique, he could have taken better use of the cat that was adamant about giving us shot over shot of. And I don't know, since he wanted the cat so much, maybe giving like an end-of-world perspective from the cat's point of view. That would have been perfect. I'm giving A Quiet Place Day 1 2 stars.
Everybody wants to be a cat.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby.
Now, before we get into the rest of the show, make sure you check out my reviews for movies that just became available to rent, buy, or stream now.
Now available on video cassette.
Two best friends, one already has a family and the other is having a baby after a one-night stand, and life will test their friendship through the good times and the bad. And even at the bad times, maybe had a good time, receiving 3.5 stars. Remember Her, Fury is Bored, and Furiosa, which isn't as furious as Fury Road, but still a strong Furious 3 stars. It's finally available, the Academy Award-winning animated feature, The Boy and the Heron, which challenges the viewer in thought with its beauty of visuals and storytelling, receiving 3.5 stars. A comedian/father faces a crucial decision about his autistic son's future and takes him on a life-changing cross-country road trip in Ezra, which had fantastic performances and was full of heart and received 3 stars. A story you had to believe in, see, and if that had a premise but had the imagination of a middle-aged man playing with stuffed animals, receiving 2.5 stars. Witness how the strangers became the strangers in The Strangers Chapter 1 that I really wished I never witnessed, receiving 1 star. When his family is murdered, a deaf boy is trained by a mysterious shaman to become an instrument of death in Boy Kills World. That was so crazy that it worked, receiving 3 stars. Welcome to the front line when empires fall in Civil War that seemed like the wrong movie and the wrong time, but added nothing more than the things we see on the news during election time, receiving 2 stars. And finally, a down-and-out stuntman must find the missing star of his ex-girlfriend's blockbuster film in Fall Guy that had a kick-ass soundtrack but barely fell below recommendation, receiving 2.5 stars. You can check out those reviews on my previous episodes, and while you do, please don't forget to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Now, before we get into the last set of reviews, there is a podcast as part of my weekly listening routine, and you can catch my appearance in a couple episodes coming soon, and that's with the Talking Smack podcast. Make sure to listen, subscribe, and review. But let's hear from the Talking Smack podcast now.
Alex, what would you say if I told you there's a nerd podcast out there that talks blockbuster movies, superhero comics, TV shows, anime, and so much more?
Josh, I would say that is literally every nerd podcast out there.
Alex, that's our podcast, Talking Smack, every Wednesday. We're supposed to be promoting it right now.
Yes, and we promote that with our amazing upper Midwest Wisconsin accents.
Oh yeah, check out Talking Smack every Wednesday on your favorite podcatcher, don't you know?
Exactly. Crap, that was really bad.
Kevin Costner chronicles a multifaceted 15-year-old span of pre- and post-Civil War expansion and the settlement of the American West in Horizon, an American Saga, Chapter 1.
Ain't from here. Something you want to say? I will tell you this. In these territories, men will come try you. They will take from you until you are wiped clean from this land. I'm just saying that's something you might want to keep in mind.
You think? You and I are standing guard on one of the last great open spaces.
That looks like a promising place.
The place I might be able to see myself. You just have to stand at the river, and you can see what the men and the women up there see. That's what drove us across the ocean to this country in the first place. Hope.
Lieutenant, there's no reason for you to stay here. And here you are.
The men who hunt this land, they're not going to share it with you. What you build, they will burn down.
We just got to keep going.
You be careful. Someone's gonna take that gun and wrap you with it.
What? We talked enough.
Now, Kevin Costner must have taken a fancy to this genre after playing John Dutton in Yellowstone, putting his spin on the Old West as director and writer here, alongside new writer John Bird and limited writer most notable of 1985's Silverado writer Mark Kasdan. I have said it before on an upcoming episode of Back to the Balcony that I am very particular about the Western genre, or even period pieces, to show me something that I haven't seen before. Tell me a story that hasn't been a copy of a copy of a copy. Now, Horizon and American Saga Chapter 1 is a hard movie to critique in a sense, because this is the first of 4 chapters, with Chapter 2 releasing later this summer. And I have a feeling that Chapter 2 will be the best reviewed movie of the 4 films. And number 3 will be the most entertaining of the 4. And that is solely based on if I were to speculate based on Costner's style of storytelling. And I'll go even further with maybe even Chapter 1 or 2 being nominated with J. Michael Murrow as Best Cinematography come awards time, with his previous works being 2004's Crash, The Last Mimsy, and Rush Hour 3. This is Murrow's true masterpiece of photography. As I sat through 3 hours of Horizon, watching the amazing, stunning, mesmerizing visuals that are truly top-notch, and listening to the even better music score by John Debney, who scored a lot of memorable scores including 2005's Sin City and The Greatest Showman. When it comes to the name John Debney, this is one of the reasons I ask at the end of every single one of my shows to stay through the credits, because when his name popped up, I was taken back to my childhood with such guilty pleasures such as Little Giants, House Guest, The Relic, Hocus Pocus, Liar Liar, and so many others. And yes, on his resume, he does have a long list of bad films, but those films may be bad, but the one thing that isn't when it comes to those films is his score. The score is one of the biggest things that pops out through any of the movie he touches. John Debney has always been one of my favorite consistent composers in film. Let me say this again for clarity. Consistent composers, even though not every score memorable per se, as listening to it over and over again, but memorable in the sense to help amplify a scene to be memorable in that scene, even in the bad films. John Debney has a resume that has films that everybody at some point has seen, and when you look at his resume, you'll tilt your head and say, no way, I remember that music, but will give you a headache trying to remember how it went. Now, when it comes to the score in Horizon, this is Debney's music masterpiece, where it almost feels like by the end of these chapters, I can picture his hands going up and saying, I'm done, this is it, I'm going out on top. This is it! Because before I even recognized his names in the credits, I was taken back by the diverse styles of compositions that supported each and every scene. It's almost like I can close my eyes and feel the Western theme, but also feel the score covering the entire career of Debney. And I will be shocked if this doesn't pop up during awards time as the best original score. Now, as I talk about masterpieces, I've talked cinematography, I've talked original scores, and now let's talk about Kevin Costner as director and co-writer. And I have to say, this could have been Kevin Costner's masterpiece to be at the same level of how Debney and Murrow should feel, but sadly, it's not. And that's not to say it still can't be. holistically once all the chapters are viewed and said and done, but as a standalone film. Horizon has its moments of awe, it has its moments of beauty, but then we get that pesky storytelling that interrupts this vacation of the mind. Horizon Chapter 1 kicks us off on a high note with an utterly engaging, exciting first 30 minutes. But this sets the tone, and Costner will soon discover that it's hard to maintain that high bar for another 2.5 hours of his storytelling, where Costner has to introduce a plethora of characters. And you know what? I get it, I do. Being the first chapter of 4, Chapter 1 has to set the groundwork for these characters. And in fairness, these characters are engaging and they're interesting. But that also adds to the frustration of wanting the movie to slow down and focus on them. But we have so many subplots to get through in the 3-hour mark, we never get a moment to really get invested into these characters. For a 3-hour movie, our first chapter, we never feel like we know too much about these characters, nor these subplots, which isn't uncommon for a movie that plans on covering multiple movies, let alone 4 chapters with unreleased runtimes. And by the end of the 3 hours, as judging it as just a standalone movie, I wanted a little bit more. I think it could have used an extra 45 minutes to really push these characters. And I get it. I know I will get some disagreement for those that hate long movies, but this movie needed an extra hour and needed to split some of the characters into the 4 chapters. But that is also hard to predict of what the next 3 chapters have in store. So it's hard to gauge what's in store for these characters or these subplots, and that's what makes this movie so hard to critique, because we don't get a full movie. We invest 3 hours, and this as a standalone movie doesn't feel complete. And some will have a problem with this. And this is where it's going to be hard to gauge what the next 3 chapters have in store. So holistically, this could be Kevin Costner's masterpiece, but we will not know until all the chapters are completed. And as I stated, my prediction will be that the second one will be better reviewed than this one, in hopes that Kevin Costner has gotten all the groundwork out of the way for the introduction to these characters to really start to move this movie along into something of substance. Not only am I predicting, but I'm hoping I'm right, because Costner, to his credit, does create something that made me want to follow along with these characters, with a cast that really does perform at their best, and with a lot of viewers that will be surprised with how many familiar faces appear in this film, including Luke Wilson, who plays a wagon settlement captain, whose appearance actually does throw off the movie, along with his performance. This is the character I actually did have a problem with because his character placement is very distracting. It has been a while since we've seen Luke Wilson in a role like this, and the moment he appears based on his past role, he faces a challenge of convincing the audience that he belongs in this movie as a serious actor. Not that serious actor that plays it cool in a comedy. When Luke Wilson appears, it reminded me of when Jim Carrey first did The Truman Show or Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, where nobody thought that he would be taken seriously, and then they would be wrong. He not only convinced an audience that he could act in a serious role, but his range was severely underestimated. But Luke Wilson is no Jim Carrey when it comes to his star power, and he has played some memorable comedic roles doing the same persona, the chill guy, and at that standard, he never really convinces me that this was a role for him or even challenges his range, because he kind of acts just like he does in any other comedy. He just plays it cool. He treats this role as every other role that he takes on. He doesn't do anything different other than giving us an inconsistent accent. Wilson's performance is the only performance that really took me out of this film. His character is considered high stakes, and we know we're going to see a lot more of him in the next movies, but I hope he finds his footing to do justice to this character, that we can tell was written with a purpose. Now, the star power in this film is here, and besides Wilson's character, never becomes a distraction to the character or story, and this is where the movie does shine. But the writing doesn't give us enough to really support these fantastic performances, and treats the audience and assumes that everybody that watches will be itching to see the next chapters. And you know what? There will be some that will be eager, and then there will be some like me that will go see it, but rather in hopes that it adds more substance and not allow visuals, music, star power to carry the movie. No matter where you stand on Horizon Chapter 1, whether you hated it, thought it was okay, or you thought it was fantastic, the movie does give us a little curiosity on what's to come. And there will be a majority of people that walk out of Horizon Chapter 1 that will be eager to see the next one. When it comes to the release of Chapter 2 in August, this will be the pivotal movie to decide the fate when it comes to the next 2 and final chapters. If Chapter 2 comes around and we lack substance and we just get a plethora of characters that really go nowhere, then I will not be looking forward to Chapter 3 nor Chapter 4. Horizon and American Saga Part 1 is a stunning story on so many levels. With 3 more chapters to go, it's hard to review this movie as a standalone. The movie is stunning for the senses, it has a fantastic cast that delivers, and it piques the interest of its characters to a mostly entertaining level for 3 hours. But the story is incomplete and the story doesn't give me enough to really say it's worth 3 hours. But this movie will be revisited when it comes to Chapter 2, and maybe I'll correct my review as the story unfolds, but as a standalone movie, we needed a story that feels worth our time. We get a fantastic beginning, we get an unbalanced middle that banks on the performances and star power, and then we get an unsatisfying end. So only time will tell if this will holistically be Kevin Costner's masterpiece. But for, again, a standalone movie, all the elements are there, just not the story. I'm giving Horizon and American Saga Chapter 1 a bare miss at 2.5 stars. When 93-year-old Thelma Post gets duped by a phone scammer pretending to be her grandson, she sets out on a quest across the city to reclaim what was taken from her in Thelma.
What's your plan for the day?
The usual. Hello?
Grandma!
Danny? You sound so strange.
I'm in jail.
Oh, my God.
Mail $10,000 to this address.
$10,000?
How did you think this was real?
Mom, you thought it was real, too.
Oh, my God. She was very convincing.
Well, she was scared, your mother. We were all scared.
Yeah.
I wasn't quite as scared, just for the record.
You gotta tell the police.
They're no use.
They contact people at random using telephone listings and social networking sites.
Like Facebook?
Sure, by Facebook.
Well, shouldn't Zuckerberg be able to fix this? What about my money? Am I supposed to just let them have it? I'm gonna get it back. I need a ride.
My mother is at large.
Why are we stopping at Mona's?
To get a gun.
Do you even know how to use it?
How hard can it be? Idiots use them all the time.
God.
Things happen to people as they age. Weird, crazy things.
We're old, diminished. The least we can do is take care of each other.
She's a tough cookie.
When she sets her mind to something, there's no stopping her.
My grandson's parked a block away. I don't have much time.
You left your grandson in the car?
But he's 24. We all have our good days and our bad days.
And what's today?
We'll find out.
Grandma?
Hello?
Hello. No, sorry. I'm just looking for my grandma. Sorry.
You know, once in a while, there's a movie that comes out that flies so under the radar due to its marketing or the assumption of being for a specific target audience, especially with it being a comedy and how tame and innocent of a comedy it portrays to be. When some go buy a ticket to a movie and they have to make their decision based on a list of blockbuster summer movies, a lot of moviegoers during the summer want family movies. They want what's popular. They want something to blow their minds. They want special effects. That's what the summer movie-going experience is all about. And when it comes to comedies in the summer, this is risque for studios. Dedication to buy a ticket to a theater for a comedy that feels like a tame experience never really bodes well in the summer when it comes to box office numbers, especially one focused around a senior citizen. We saw the same results from 1997's Out to Sea, starring Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau, which had a July 2nd release back then. And it failed in the box office, and it was one of those that did go under the radar. Movies like these, just like Out to Sea, are innocent, they feel good, they're comedic gems. That sole purpose is to hit you in the heart and funny bone, not to make you laugh out loud, but rather to act like a photographer waving a stuffed animal at you, asking you to smile. Thelma is one of these gems that even on the most rainiest of days will make you crack a smile, but also reflect on not only how we treat our senior citizens, but even our youth by adding relatable situations that we have all been through, from teaching our grandparents computers and social media to how we question the decision-making of our youth. And what our writer-director Josh Margolin does is connect the dots to paint a picture of we have youth and then we have old, we have the future of this world, we have the experience of this world, but the middle treat each as having to be consistently monitored. Thelma stars the lovely June Squibb as Thelma, who is also the voice of nostalgia in the also released in theaters Inside Out 2. Thelma falls for a scam and loses $10,000. Embarrassed and determined, she is set on getting it back. So she teams up with Ben, played by original Shaft actor Richard Roundtree, in his last theatrical appearance on the big screen before his death last October. Escaping on a scooter, these two attempt to track down this scammer with Thelma's family desperately looking for her, including Alan, played by Clark Gregg, Gail, played by Parker Posey, and her go-to technology guru grandson, Daniel, played by Fred Hitchinger. Daniel has been sheltered and watched his entire life by his parents and has driven him into a life of questioning his own ability and confidence. This is where the chemistry between Daniel and Thelma really shine into a very sweet relationship, where there's a relatability that they both share. One that's been controlled from the start to another that's been controlled after 50 years as her independence has been taken away. Our writer-director Margolin paints the picture of how we treat our seniors that really shouldn't be a big surprise to an extent, but then makes us think by the end of the climax, should it be a surprise? Josh Margolin has a sharp script here where it's almost flawless when it comes to its balance of thought, heart, and humor. There's an extra level of care he puts into his screenplay, and it visually appears on screen with his direction. And there are moments of cliche conflict between Thelma and Ben when they are on the road, but what makes it unique is that it's not necessarily frustration with each other, but frustration and conflict of their age and experience getting in the way of how they adjust to life. As I was walking out of Thelma with a smile, the movie almost made me reflect on life, but also June Squibb's life at the age of 95, and this being one of her first leading roles. She proved with Thelma that she can carry a movie in her on-screen likability and talent, which is almost poetic in a way at the age of 95, showing, just like our Thelma character, that it is never too late to show what they can accomplish or do, even if they're underestimated by others. This is Josh Margolin's first major theatrical film written and directed, and this is what I love about watching a writer-director's first movie, because you can almost gain a perspective of personality when it comes to watching their first film. And with Margolin, with how much care he puts into these characters and dialogue, he doesn't try and put in cliche moments, he doesn't try and reinvent the wheel in overdramatic dialogue or push the limits of humor, but rather uses situations and relatability to put a smile on a viewer's face. He never gets tempted to do anything other than that. He stays true to what he knows, and since this is his first movie, what he knows is life and relationship between family. Thelma is exciting at times, it's innocently funny, and it's heartfelt. But above all, it's consistent in its messaging and how it gets there. And again, we can tell that this is Josh Margolin's first screenplay and first time at the director's seat. But unlike any other time I've said it, this is where it works, because there's a level of simplicity and innocence put into this where it just works beautifully to match the tone of our characters, especially with June Squibb, who proves again it takes one movie to become a memorable treasure in film. And this, at the young age of 95, has become a name just like the title of Thelma that I will not forget. It would be so easy to look past Thelma, and that's a shame because these small gems are usually the ones that take me by surprise, and Thelma, I think, will take many by surprise, almost as seeing your grandma turn on the computer by herself for the first time. I'm giving Thelma 3.5 stars. And that's a cut on this week's edition of The Movie Wire. I want to thank you for listening and thank you for your support. You can also show support by following me on Instagram, Blue Sky, X, Thread, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, and Letterboxd at Movie Wire Show. And please don't forget to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And if you haven't yet checked out the Cult-Worthy Cinema Podcast and the Movie Wire's crossover show, Back to the Balcony, make sure you do. Again, the link of that show will be in the description of this episode. Until next week, do me a favor. Make sure you stay for after the credits to show the respect to those that put their blood, sweat, and tears into making a feature film and support your local movie theaters.
A verdict has been made on this episode of The Movie Wire by your host, Justin Henson. He thanks you for listening to the show. You can follow Justin on Instagram and Twitter at Movie Wire Show or visit his website, www.themoviewire.com. Oh, and don't forget to leave a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. I'm sure he'd love to hear from you. Until next time, we will see you at the movies.
Thank you for bringing me to the movies.